At my parents' 40th anniversary dinner, my older sister purposely tripped and landed right on my husband's lap while the whole family laughed. My mother actually raised her champagne glass and announced that they looked better together anyway since my defective body could not even carry a child. I sat there shaking with rage, but then my husband stood up, letting my sister crash to the floor. He looked straight into her eyes and delivered exactly one sentence that completely wiped the smirk off her face and destroyed her perfect marriage on the spot. My name is Elise, and I am 34 years old. I work as a senior forensic accountant for a top firm in Chicago, which means I spend my days tracking down hidden assets and exposing financial lies. But no amount of professional training could have prepared me for the sheer cruelty my own family was capable of dealing out in a single evening. The night began at an exclusive downtown Chicago restaurant. My parents, Catherine and Thomas, had rented out the entire private dining room to celebrate 40 years of marriage. The space was dripping in opulence, with crystal chandeliers casting a warm glow over the long mahogany table. 50 of our closest relatives and family friends were seated around us, eating roasted duck and drinking imported wine. On the surface, it looked like a gathering of the perfect wealthy American family. Underneath it was a toxic hierarchy where I was always positioned at the very bottom. My older sister Sienna was 36 but still acted like a spoiled teenager who needed all eyes on her at all times. She was the golden child, the one who married a highly successful Black American former federal prosecutor named Andre, the one who lived in a massive suburban mansion and gave my parents their precious twin grandchildren. Throughout the dinner, Sienna had been drinking heavily, laughing too loudly, and making pointed comments about my tailored black suit, claiming I always dressed like I was heading to a funeral instead of a celebration. I ignored her just like I always did. I was simply trying to survive the night. The physical and emotional toll of the past 2 years had left me completely exhausted. My husband Cole and I had just gone through our third failed round of in vitro fertilization. My stomach was still bruised from the daily hormone injections, and my heart was still shattered from the doctor calling us last week to tell us the final embryo did not survive. I was grieving a child I would never meet, and my family knew this. Halfway through the main course, Sienna stood up from her chair to go speak to one of our aunts. To do so, she had to walk behind where Cole and I were seated. There was plenty of room, and the Persian rug beneath us was perfectly flat. Yet as she passed directly behind Cole, she let out a theatrical gasp and suddenly pitched forward. She did not just stumble. She twisted her body and landed squarely on Cole's lap, wrapping her arms tightly around his neck to steady herself. She giggled, pressing her chest against his shoulder. "Oh my goodness, I am so incredibly clumsy tonight. You caught me, Cole." Cole is 35 years old and works as a cybersecurity expert. He is a quiet man, incredibly protective and completely immune to my family's manipulation. I watched his jaw clench in immediate disgust. He did not hug her back. He reached up and grabbed her wrists to pry her off him, but before he could push her away, the worst moment of my life unfolded. My mother, Catherine, stood up from her seat at the head of the table. She picked up her silver fork and tapped it sharply against her crystal champagne flute. The gentle ringing sound brought the entire room to a dead silence. Every relative, every friend, and every business partner turned to look at the head of the table. Catherine smiled, a cold, calculated smile that she reserved specifically for moments when she wanted to inflict maximum damage under the guise of a joke. "Let us be honest, everyone," she announced, her voice echoing clearly off the high ceilings. "They actually look much better together. I mean, at least Sienna can carry a child. Elise's defective body could not even give Cole a baby after tossing our family money out the window on 3 failed IVF rounds. What a complete waste of an investment." The air in the room vanished. My vision blurred. I heard a few of my aunts chuckle nervously, and my father Thomas actually let out a low laugh of agreement while sipping his scotch. The humiliation crashed over me in suffocating waves. My mother had just taken the deepest, most agonizing pain of my life and used it as a punchline for a dinner party. And the worst part was the lie. It was not their money. Cole and I had paid for every single medical bill out of our own pockets, going into severe debt to fund those treatments, while my parents had never contributed a single dime to my health care. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my wine glass directly at my mother's perfectly made-up face, but my throat was locked tight with a mixture of profound grief and searing rage. I could not breathe. Andre was sitting directly across the table from us. As a former federal prosecutor, he was a man built on strict integrity and sharp observation. He stared at his wife lingering on another man's lap, and then looked at my mother with absolute disbelief. His dark eyes narrowed and his posture went completely rigid. But Cole did not wait for anyone else to intervene. He did not raise his voice. He did not yell or cause a physical scene. He simply stood up completely straight and stepped backward. Because Sienna had her weight entirely supported by him letting go meant gravity took over instantly. She shrieked as she plummeted, hitting the hard wooden floor with a heavy thud. Her expensive silk dress hiked up past her thighs, and her wine spilled directly across her chest. Cole buttoned his suit jacket with chilling calmness. He looked down at Sienna writhing on the floor, and then shifted his gaze across the room, meeting Andre's eyes directly. When Cole spoke, his voice was low, but it carried a lethal authority that cut through the silence like a knife. I would rather be sterile for life than raise a demon with your DNA, Sienna. Especially since Andre just found out your miracle twins are the biological product of your country club tennis coach. For exactly 2 seconds after Cole spoke, the entire dining room was paralyzed. The only sound was the ice shifting in my father's glass. Then the silence shattered into absolute chaos. Aunts and uncles gasped collectively. Someone dropped a china plate, and it smashed against the hardwood floor. But the most violent reaction came from my mother. Catherine did not check on her golden child writhing on the floor in spilled wine. Instead, she charged directly at Cole. Her hand swung through the air and struck my husband's cheek with a sharp crack that echoed across the vaulted ceiling. Cole did not even flinch. He just turned his head back slowly, looking at her with eyes so devoid of emotion it was terrifying. "How dare you!" My mother shrieked, her face contorted with a rage I had only ever seen behind closed doors. "How dare you humiliate your sister in front of our guests? You ungrateful, vicious liar!" She turned her venom on me, pointing a manicured finger right at my face. "This is your fault, Elise. You put him up to this because you are a bitter, barren failure. You have been nothing but a burden to this family since the day you were born. I should have known you would ruin our anniversary. You have been dragging us down since you were 18 years old, when I had to empty my own bank accounts to pay off your massive credit card debts. You were a financial parasite then, and you are a miserable parasite now." She raised her hand again, aiming for my face this time, but the scared little girl who used to take her abuse was dead. The woman standing here now was a senior forensic accountant who spent her life destroying liars for a living. I reached out and caught her wrist mid-air. My grip was like a vice. My mother gasped in shock, trying to yank her arm away, but I held it firmly, stepping directly into her personal space. "You mean the credit card debt I accrued at 18? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried across the entire dead silent room. My mother paled. "Let go of me," she demanded. I did not let go. "I am talking about the platinum card you secretly opened using my social security number." I continued projecting my voice so every single relative could hear the truth. "The card you maxed out to $40,000 to fund Sienna's luxury backpacking trip across Europe because you did not want to dip into your own vacation fund." Murmurs broke out among the guests. My father Thomas stepped forward looking panicked, but I held my ground. "I was a college freshman when the collection agencies called me," I said, staring dead into my mother's terrified eyes. "I worked 3 different waitress shifts. I slept 4 hours a night. And I scrubbed diner floors for 2 years to pay off that stolen debt, just so I would not go to federal prison for a fraud you committed. You did not pay off a single cent, Mother. I bled for that debt so your golden child could drink champagne in Paris." I released her wrist, shoving her hand back toward her. My mother stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the dining table. She looked around wildly, seeking support from her friends and family, but the wealthy socialites were staring at her in absolute horror. Identity theft against your own child was not a scandal you could easily sweep under the rug. On the floor, Sienna was finally scrambling to her feet. Her expensive silk dress was stained with dark red wine, making it look like a gaping wound across her chest. She slipped on her heels, her carefully constructed image completely destroyed. She looked around frantically, and her eyes locked onto Andre. Andre stood near the exit, a towering figure of absolute authority. As a former federal prosecutor, he commanded respect in every room he entered. Sienna lunged toward him, sobbing hysterically and gripping the lapels of his tailored suit. "Andre, baby, please," she wailed, burying her face in his chest. "You have to arrest him. You have to do something. Cole is lying. Elise is just jealous of us. She is jealous of our beautiful twins. You know I would never cheat on you. You are my husband. Please defend me. Tell them they are lying." She looked up at him with tear-filled eyes, playing the desperate victim role that had worked for her entire life. But Andre was not my parents. He did not coddle liars. He analyzed evidence. Andre looked down at the woman he had married. His expression was a terrifying mask of absolute calm. He did not wrap his arms around her. He did not whisper words of comfort. Instead, he raised his hands, grabbed her wrists, and peeled her fingers off his suit jacket one by one. He shoved her hands away with a physical revulsion that made Sienna stumble backward. Then Andre looked right over her head, ignoring her existence entirely. He locked eyes with my husband across the ruined dining room. "You said you had proof?" Cole Andre asked, his deep voice cutting through the remaining whispers in the room. Sienna let out a choked sob, spinning around to look at Cole, her face drained of the last remaining drop of color. Cole did not say a word at first. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his blazer. He pulled out a small, sleek silver USB drive and held it up between his thumb and forefinger. The metal caught the light from the chandeliers, glinting like a tiny lethal weapon. "I do," Cole said, his tone completely flat. "I have 30 voicemails she left on my secure server over the last 6 months." The metallic glint of the USB drive in Cole's hand seemed to suck all the remaining air out of the room. For a brief moment, nobody moved. The entire dining room was frozen in a state of suspended animation. But Cole did not wait for a judge or a jury to grant him permission to present his evidence. He did not even bother handing the drive over to Andre. With his free hand, Cole pulled his smartphone from his pocket. As an elite cybersecurity expert, penetrating a commercial restaurant's unsecured Bluetooth network was child's play. It took him exactly 4 seconds. He tapped his screen twice. The soft classical jazz music playing from the premium surround sound speakers mounted in the ceiling abruptly cut off. A sharp crackle of static echoed through the private dining room, making several of the wealthy guests flinch in their seats. Then Sienna's voice filled the room. It was not her usual polished country club tone that she used to charm our parents. It was slurred, desperate, and incredibly pathetic. The audio echoed, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers and the mahogany walls. "Cole, please pick up," the recorded voice pleaded. "I know you are awake. Leave her, Cole. Elise is broken. She is a medical failure, and you know it. You need a real woman. I can give you what she cannot. I have always wanted you." Sienna let out a high-pitched scream, covering her ears, and dropping to her knees right there in the spilled wine. My mother, Catherine, lunged toward Cole, attempting to snatch the phone out of his hand, but Cole simply sidestepped her like a matador avoiding a clumsy bull. He tapped his screen again. A second voicemail began playing immediately. This recording stripped away any illusion of seduction and replaced it with raw, frantic panic. "Cole, you have to help me," Sienna's voice cried out from the speakers. "Andre cannot find out about this. You have to lend me the money, Cole. I owe $300,000 to the guys operating out of the South Side. I lost it on the tables. I gambled the kids' college funds and I lost it all. They said they are coming to the house, Cole. They are going to hurt me. Please do not tell Andre. He will take the twins and lock me away." My father, Thomas, finally snapped out of his shocked paralysis. His face turned a dangerous shade of crimson. "Turn that off!" he roared, his voice cracking. He charged toward the nearest wall speaker, looking around wildly for a volume dial or a power cord to rip out of the drywall. In his blind panic to save the family image, he did not see the heavy oak dining chair directly in his path. Thomas slammed his shin into the solid wood, tripping hard and crashing face first into a passing waiter. A massive tray of water glasses shattered across the floor, covering my father's expensive suit in ice and broken crystal. It was a pathetic display of a man losing absolute control over the facade he prized above all else. The society friends and business partners sitting at the tables were openly staring now, whispering to one another in utter horror. Through all of this chaos, Andre stood perfectly still. As a Black American man who had built his entire life and career around justice and federal law, he did not succumb to the panic unfolding around him. His imposing frame was a pillar of terrifying silence amidst the screaming and shattered glass. He dealt with criminals and liars for a living. He recognized a confession the second he heard it. He looked down at Sienna, who was now crawling toward him on the wine-stained floor, her hands reaching out desperately for his polished leather shoes. "Andre, it is a deep fake!" Sienna wailed, her expensive makeup running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. "Elise paid someone to make that audio. You know my sister is a monster. You know she is just trying to destroy us because she cannot have a family of her own. Please believe me, Andre. I am your wife." Andre did not bend down to help her up. He did not yell or raise his voice. He simply raised his left hand and looked at the thick platinum wedding band resting on his ring finger. The veins in his forearm bulged as he gripped the metal. With one smooth, deliberate motion, he slid the ring off his finger. He held it suspended in the air for a fraction of a second. Then he dropped it directly into Sienna's half-empty champagne glass sitting on the table beside him. The heavy platinum hit the crystal with a sharp, definitive clink that somehow cut through all the noise in the room. "Call your defense attorney," Sienna Andre said. His voice lacked any warmth or hesitation. It was the voice of a federal prosecutor addressing a guilty defendant before a judge. "Because I am officially taking full custody of the twins and prosecuting you in family court by sunrise." He turned his back on her and walked toward the grand double doors of the private dining room. He did not look back, not even when Sienna let out a guttural scream and collapsed onto the broken glass, crying hysterically. The heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind him, sealing Sienna's fate. Catherine realized her golden child had just lost her wealthy, prestigious husband and was facing total financial ruin. My mother slowly turned to face me. The mask of the elegant society matriarch was completely gone, replaced by the face of a woman ready to commit murder to protect her own ego. She pointed a trembling finger directly at my chest, her eyes wide with a frantic, hateful energy. "You are dead!" Catherine hissed, her voice shaking with pure, unadulterated venom. "You orchestrated this whole spectacle to ruin your sister because you are a miserable, barren wretch. You think you are so smart, Elise. You think your little corporate accounting job makes you untouchable." She took a step closer, stepping over a piece of broken plate. "I play golf with the executive board members at your accounting firm. Our family charity funds your firm's largest accounts. I am calling the managing partners on Monday morning the second their office opens. I will tell them you are unstable and vindictive. You will be fired by noon. I will make sure you are blacklisted from every financial institution in Chicago. You will be scrubbing toilets for minimum wage before the week is over." I did not step back. I did not raise my voice to match her frantic hysteria. I simply reached over to the table and picked up my glass of Cabernet. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the rich taste, while my mother shook with rage right in front of my face. I swallowed, set the delicate glass back down on the pristine white tablecloth, and looked my mother dead in the eye. "I look forward to it, Mother." Cole and I walked out of the private dining room, leaving my mother standing amid the wreckage of her own making. The valet brought our car around, and we drove through the quiet Chicago streets in complete silence. My adrenaline was still surging, but Cole reached across the center console and rested his warm hand over mine. His grip was steady and grounding. We did not need to speak. The truth was finally out in the open, and Sienna was currently facing the full wrath of a man who prosecuted federal criminals for a living. I felt a profound sense of relief, thinking the worst of the night was over. I was entirely wrong. As we turned onto our quiet, tree-lined street in Lincoln Park, my stomach instantly dropped. A Chicago Police Department cruiser was parked directly in front of our townhouse. Its blue and red lights painted the brick facades of the neighboring houses in harsh, rhythmic flashes. Cole immediately put the car in park, and we hurried up the front steps. Our custom frosted glass front door was completely shattered. Thick shards of safety glass littered the welcome mat and crunched beneath my heels as I stepped through the empty doorframe. Inside my living room stood my father Thomas and my mother Catherine. They were flanked by two uniformed police officers. The house was a mess. The expensive vases on the entryway table had been knocked over, and dirt from a shattered potted plant was ground into my pristine hardwood floor. It was obvious they had tried to force their way upstairs before the police arrived. The moment we walked in, Thomas pointed a shaking finger directly at Cole. "There he is, officers," my father barked, his face flushed with panic and rage. "Arrest him right now. That is the man who breached our corporate network." The older of the two police officers held up a hand to calm my father down before stepping toward us. "Sir, we received a frantic call from this gentleman claiming an active cybercrime was taking place inside this residence. He claims you used your expertise to hack into his family real estate firm servers to steal highly classified proprietary data and blackmail them." My father did not even let the officer finish. "He is a dangerous hacker," Thomas shouted, stepping forward. "He infiltrated our systems to fabricate audio files to destroy my daughter's marriage tonight. I demand you go upstairs to his home office and confiscate his hard drives right now. All the stolen data is in there. If you do not seize those computers, he will wipe the evidence." Catherine stood next to him, crossing her arms and attempting to look like a traumatized victim. "He is unstable, officer," my mother chimed in, using her most delicate, fragile voice. "We had to break the glass door to get inside because we knew he was actively downloading our company files. We were just trying to protect our family business from this criminal." I looked at my parents in absolute awe of their audacity. They had literally smashed their way into my home to destroy Cole's computers, hoping to erase the original audio files of Sienna's confession before Andre could legally subpoena them. When the neighbors inevitably heard the breaking glass and called the cops, my father immediately pivoted to playing the victim to avoid a breaking and entering charge. It was a masterclass in narcissistic manipulation. I turned my head to look at Cole. He remained entirely unfazed. As an elite cybersecurity expert, his servers were encrypted to military standards. Even if my parents had made it up the stairs, they would have needed a blowtorch to get through his reinforced steel server rack. Cole simply looked at the officers and let out a dry, humorless laugh. The younger police officer looked around the room, taking in the shattered glass, the dirt on the floor, and my father's frantic, sweating face. He clearly recognized that this was a wealthy family dispute spiraling drastically out of control. The officer turned his attention to me, holding his notepad. "Ma'am, public records show you are the primary homeowner of this property. Your father admits to breaking the front glass to gain entry without your permission because he claimed there was an active digital theft occurring. Since there is zero physical evidence of any cybercrime right now, I need to ask you a question. Do you want to press charges against your parents for breaking and entering and property damage?" My mother scoffed loudly, dropping her fragile victim act instantly. "She would not dare," Catherine sneered, looking me up and down with utter contempt. "She is my daughter. If she presses charges against her own father, I will make sure she never shows her face in this city again. Tell them to take his computers, Elise. Tell them the truth before you ruin what is left of your miserable life." I did not yell. I did not scream or cry or stoop to their level of frantic hysteria. My mind shifted entirely into the cold, calculated precision of a senior forensic accountant. I walked past the broken glass and stepped right up to the coffee table where I had left my leather work briefcase earlier that afternoon. I unzipped the main compartment and reached inside. I bypassed my laptop and pulled out a thick, heavy envelope stamped with certified federal tax seals. I turned around to face the two police officers. I held the heavy envelope up so both my parents and the officers could see the federal insignia printed on the front. "Officers, since you are already here at my home," I said, my voice perfectly steady and echoing clearly in the ruined living room, I would actually like to file a federal identity theft report tonight. My father stopped breathing. The color rapidly drained from his face as he stared at the certified envelope in my hands. My father, Thomas, has been using my name and my social security number to list me as a proxy director for a shell company based out of Delaware. I continued locking eyes with the older officer. I have the complete forensic financial trail right here in this folder. He has been using my stolen identity to funnel and evade $1.2 million in commercial property taxes for the last 5 years. The older officer took the heavy envelope from my hands. He pulled out the first stack of papers. Even a patrol cop could recognize the gravity of what he was looking at. Bank routing numbers, wire transfer logs, and notarized state tax documents with my forged signature were all highlighted in bright yellow ink. I had spent the last 3 months quietly compiling every single fraudulent transaction after an alert flagged on my credit monitor. The officer looked at the meticulously organized spreadsheets and then looked slowly back at my father. The entire energy in the ruined living room shifted. The cop's posture straightened, and his hand moved away from his radio. This was no longer a simple domestic dispute over a broken glass door. This was a major federal crime. Thomas took a step backward, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the broken glass. "That is absurd," he stammered, his voice pitching up in panic. "She is making this up. She fabricated those documents to get back at us because of a family argument. She is completely delusional." I kept my hands folded calmly in front of me. "I am a senior forensic accountant, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly level. "I track down offshore accounts and untangle corporate money laundering schemes for a living. I find hidden money for multinational conglomerates. Did you honestly think I would not notice a fake corporation attached to my own social security number? You used my clean background to set up a holding company in Delaware so you could hide the profits from your commercial real estate sales. It is textbook tax evasion, and you left a paper trail a mile long." The younger police officer stepped in front of my father, creating a physical barrier between us. "Sir," the officer said, his tone completely devoid of the polite deference he had shown earlier, "we are going to take this file and log it into evidence tonight. Given the dollar amount and the nature of these allegations, we are legally obligated to forward this entire packet to the Financial Crimes Unit and the Internal Revenue Service." Catherine let out a sharp gasp. She grabbed my father's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his suit jacket. "You cannot do that," my mother cried out, looking at the officers. "She is our daughter. This is a private family business matter. You have no right to involve the federal government in our private affairs." "Ma'am," the older officer replied sternly, "identity theft and tax evasion of over $1 million is a federal offense. It is no longer a private matter once it is reported. I suggest you and your husband leave this property immediately before the homeowner decides to add trespassing to the report." My father realized in that exact moment that his physical intimidation had failed. He could not bully the police, and he could not bully me. The color rushed back into his face, but it was driven by pure malicious spite. He shrugged off my mother's grip and glared at me with a hatred so deep it made my stomach turn. But I did not look away. "You think you are so smart, Elise?" he snarled, his voice dropping into a vicious growl. "You think a few spreadsheets make you untouchable? You seem to have forgotten who feeds you. My family charity funds the largest client at your accounting firm. We bring them millions of dollars in billable hours every single year." He pointed a thick finger at my face. "I'm calling the executive board the minute the sun comes up. I will tell them you are stealing confidential data and using it to extort your own family. You are going to be fired before you even finish your morning coffee. Your career in Chicago is over. You will never work in finance again. I will crush you until you have absolutely nothing left." I stood there and let him scream. I let him throw his weight around and make his grand threats because I knew something he did not. I knew that screaming was the last resort of a powerless man. "Get out of my house," I said quietly. Thomas sneered at me. "Enjoy your last night of employment," he spat. He grabbed Catherine's arm and dragged her out through the shattered doorframe. They marched down the front steps and got into their luxury sedan, speeding off into the night. The police officers stayed behind for a few more minutes, asking me to sign a preliminary statement regarding the documents I had handed over. They promised a detective from the Financial Crimes Division would be in touch very soon. They advised us to board up the door and left the house to return to their patrol. Once the flashing police lights faded down the street, the heavy silence of the house settled around us. The cold night air was blowing in through the broken glass, chilling the living room. I let out a long breath I felt like I had been holding for hours. My shoulders dropped and the adrenaline finally began to recede. Cole walked over to the entryway closet and pulled out a heavy roll of duct tape and a thick plastic tarp. He started taping the tarp over the shattered door frame to keep the cold wind out. He moved with his usual quiet efficiency, completely undisturbed by the chaos my family had just brought into our home. When he finished securing the plastic, he turned around and looked at me. His dark eyes were warm and filled with an unwavering pride. He walked over and gently pulled me into his arms, resting his chin on the top of my head. "Are you okay?" Cole asked softly. I rested my cheek against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time in years, the suffocating weight of my parents' expectations and their constant psychological abuse was gone. They had finally shown their true colors, and I had not backed down. "I am fine," I said, looking up at him. "But my father thinks he is going to get me fired tomorrow morning." Cole let out a low rumble of a laugh. He reached up and brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear. "Thomas thinks he has all the power." Cole said, a sharp, intelligent smile forming on his lips. "He thinks he can bully the board of directors into terminating you to protect his own secrets." I smiled back, mirroring his expression. The exhaustion was completely replaced by a fierce, burning anticipation. "They do not know my firm promoted me to senior partner on Friday," I said, my voice steady and cold. "They do not know I am untouchable now. Let us initiate the audit." Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp, sharp clarity that follows a violent storm. I walked into the downtown Chicago headquarters of my accounting firm, wearing a tailored charcoal suit and carrying a profound sense of absolute purpose. For 9 years I had walked these polished halls, keeping my head down, working grueling 80-hour weeks to prove my worth in a male-dominated field. I had swallowed my pride and endured my family's constant belittling. But today, I owned the floor. As a newly minted senior partner, my access clearance had been updated over the weekend. I swiped my heavy brass keycard and headed straight for the executive boardroom overlooking the city skyline. I knew exactly who would be coming through the lobby doors at 9 o'clock sharp. Down on the ground floor, my mother Catherine and my sister Sienna marched through the revolving glass doors like they owned the entire skyscraper. According to the front desk receptionist, who later relayed the story with wide eyes, they bypassed the visitor check-in entirely. Catherine was wearing her signature pearl necklace and carrying a designer handbag, marching straight up to the executive assistant desk with aggressive entitlement. She demanded an immediate audience with Mr. Bradley, the managing partner of our firm. She loudly proclaimed to anyone within earshot that she was the director of a prominent family charity foundation, one of the firm's most lucrative clients. She announced she had urgent, highly sensitive misconduct allegations regarding a rogue employee that required immediate termination. Sienna stood right behind her, crossing her arms and looking incredibly smug, perfectly preparing to play the role of the traumatized victim. They fully expected Mr. Bradley to panic. They expected him to rush out of his office, grovel, apologize for my existence, and immediately draft my termination papers to protect his precious billable hours. They believed their wealth and social status made them the ultimate authority in any room they entered. But my mother drastically underestimated how corporate forensic accounting actually works. We do not answer to rogue charity directors when federal tax agencies get involved. Mr. Bradley stepped out of his corner office. He did not look apologetic. He looked at my mother and sister with a mixture of professional exhaustion and profound legal distance. He did not offer his hand to shake or offer them coffee. He simply adjusted his glasses, shook his head slightly, and gestured down the long glass corridor toward the main boardroom. Catherine strutted down the hallway, her heels clicking sharply against the polished marble. She walked with her chin held high, assuming she was being led to a private execution chamber for my career. Sienna followed closely behind, practically vibrating with anticipation at the thought of watching me lose everything I had worked for. Mr. Bradley reached the heavy mahogany double doors of the executive boardroom and pushed them open. He stepped aside, allowing my mother and sister to walk in first. The moment they crossed the threshold, their momentum completely died. They froze in their tracks. I was sitting dead center at the head of the massive mahogany conference table. The morning sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me, casting long, intimidating shadows across the room. I was not alone. Flanking me on both sides were four of my sharpest junior forensic accountants, each one typing quietly on their laptops and analyzing thick stacks of financial ledgers. I did not stand up when they entered. I did not flinch or look away. I simply folded my hands, resting them on top of a massive, thick red binder sitting directly in front of me. Catherine stopped breathing. The triumphant smirk on Sienna's face instantly evaporated, replaced by sheer panicked confusion. They looked from me to the junior accountants, and then back to Mr. Bradley, who was quietly closing the boardroom doors behind them, sealing them inside. "What is the meaning of this?" Catherine demanded, her voice trembling as the reality of the situation began to set in. Her eyes darted wildly around the room. "Mr. Bradley, I came here to speak with you privately about the immediate termination of this employee. She has been stealing confidential data and using it to blackmail her own family. You need to call security and have her escorted out of the building." Mr. Bradley stood near the door, entirely unmoved by her demands. His face remained a mask of corporate indifference. "That is impossible, Catherine," he said, his voice echoing clearly in the quiet room. "As of Friday afternoon, Elise is a senior partner at this firm. I do not have the authority to terminate her, nor would I want to. Furthermore, any personal complaints you have are completely irrelevant to the legal matters taking place today." Sienna gripped her mother's arm, her manicured nails digging into Catherine's expensive coat. "Mom, what is going on?" Sienna whispered, her voice pitching up in genuine fear. "Why are there so many accountants in here?" I did not give my mother the chance to formulate another lie or scream another threat. I took control of the room with the precise, calculated authority of a woman who held all the cards. I leaned forward slightly, looking directly into my mother's terrified eyes. I placed my hand firmly on the thick red binder resting on the table. With one smooth motion, I slid the heavy binder across the polished mahogany wood. It stopped right at the edge of the table, directly in front of where Catherine and Sienna were standing. "Thanks for saving us the trip, Mother," I said, my voice dropping into a lethal professional calm. "The IRS just appointed my division to conduct a comprehensive forensic audit of your charity foundation. Take a seat." The thick red binder sat on the mahogany table like an unexploded bomb. Catherine stared at the bold letters printed across the cover. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The arrogant society matriarch who had marched into my firm demanding my immediate termination was entirely paralyzed. She finally understood that her wealth and social status meant absolutely nothing inside this room. Sienna reacted differently. The smug satisfaction she wore just minutes ago shattered into raw, frantic panic. Her eyes darted wildly around the boardroom, taking in the sheer number of forensic accountants staring back at her. She realized the trap had closed and she was standing right in the center of it. Sienna practically threw her expensive designer purse onto the table and dug her trembling hands inside. She pulled out her smartphone with fingers shaking so badly she almost dropped the device on the floor. She fumbled with the screen, bringing it up to her ear, while pacing frantically in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Pick up," she muttered under her breath, her chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. Someone on the other end answered. It was her high-priced defense attorney, the kind of sleazy corporate lawyer my parents kept on retainer to make their minor legal troubles disappear. "You need to get down here right now!" Sienna shrieked into the phone, her voice pitching up into a hysterical whine. "Elise has lost her mind. She is trying to frame us. She set up some kind of fake federal audit to steal the family charity money and ruin my reputation. You have to come stop this right now. Bring an injunction. Bring the police. Bring whatever you need to shut her down." I sat back in my leather chair and watched my sister unravel. I did not interrupt her unhinged phone call. My team of junior accountants continued typing quietly on their laptops, documenting every word she screamed into the receiver. Mr. Bradley, the managing partner of my firm, stood silently by the door, watching the wealthy socialite humiliate herself in his executive boardroom. "They are holding us hostage in here," Sienna cried, playing the desperate victim role flawlessly. "Just get to the accounting firm immediately. I will pay you triple your hourly rate. Just get me out of here." She hung up the phone and glared at me. Her chest was heaving, but she tried to put her arrogant mask back on. "My lawyer is 10 minutes away." "Elise," Sienna spat, her voice trembling with false bravado. "You made a massive mistake today. You think you can use your little promotion to bully us, but you are about to face a massive defamation lawsuit. You are going to regret ever testing me." I did not respond. I simply kept my hands folded on top of the red binder and waited. Less than 10 minutes later, the heavy sound of purposeful footsteps echoed from the marble hallway outside. Sienna turned toward the entrance, a triumphant smirk, attempting to break through her panic. She fully expected her slick corporate defense attorney to walk through those doors and save her from the consequences of her own actions. The heavy mahogany doors swung open. It was not her lawyer. It was Andre. Andre stepped into the boardroom wearing a flawless charcoal suit and a crisp white shirt. He carried a sleek, dark leather briefcase in his right hand. As a Black American man who had spent years prosecuting ruthless white-collar criminals in federal court, he possessed a terrifying level of absolute calm. He radiated power. The moment he crossed the threshold, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Catherine let out a loud gasp of relief. She mistakenly believed her highly influential son-in-law had arrived to protect the family empire. She thought Andre was here to use his extensive legal connections to shut down my audit and rescue his wife. "Oh, Andre, thank God you are here," Catherine cried, rushing toward him. "You have to put a stop to this nonsense. Elise has completely lost her mind. She is trying to use the federal government to harass your wife and destroy our charity. Tell Mr. Bradley to call this off immediately." Andre did not look at Catherine. He did not acknowledge her frantic pleading. He did not even look at his wife, who was staring at him with wide, hopeful eyes. Andre walked straight past his mother-in-law, his polished shoes clicking against the hardwood floor. He walked the entire length of the long conference table and stopped right next to my chair. He placed his dark leather briefcase directly on the table, right next to my red forensic audit binder. He snapped the brass locks open. The sound was loud and definitive. He reached inside and pulled out a stack of documents bearing the official watermarked seal of the federal government. He turned to face the room, addressing Catherine and Sienna, with a voice that commanded absolute, unwavering obedience. "Catherine, you need to sit down and remain completely silent." Andre instructed, his tone completely devoid of any familial warmth. "I am not here to protect your charity, and I am certainly not here to rescue your daughter." Sienna's hopeful expression collapsed. "Andre? What are you talking about?" she stammered, taking a step forward. "You are my husband. You are a lawyer. You have to help me." "I am a former federal prosecutor," Sienna Andre corrected, staring at her with cold, analytical detachment. "And as of 8 o'clock this morning, I have officially been retained by the Internal Revenue Service. I am acting as special counsel for this specific tax evasion and charity fraud investigation. I am fully teamed up with Elise's Forensic Accounting Division. We are partners on this case." Catherine stumbled backward, hitting the edge of a leather chair and collapsing into it. She stared at Andre in pure, unadulterated horror. The realization that the two most capable, brilliant professionals in the family had united against them finally crushed her spirit. Sienna completely lost her mind. The reality of facing a federal prosecutor who intimately knew her life shattered her last remaining defenses. She rushed forward, grabbing the sleeve of Andre's suit jacket. She began to cry actual, genuine tears of terror. "No, Andre, please," Sienna begged, shaking his arm frantically. "You cannot do this to me. I am your wife. We have a family. You cannot put me in prison. You have to help me fight this. Give me access to our joint investment accounts right now. I need to transfer money to my personal checking so I can hire a real defense team. I need cash immediately, Andre. Please give me the account passwords." Andre did not comfort her. He did not pull her into a hug or offer a shred of sympathy. He looked down at the woman who had lied to him, manipulated him, and betrayed him with another man. He looked at her with an expression so deadpan it sent a chill down my spine. I legally froze all your accounts at 8 in the morning. Andre said, his voice perfectly flat and lethal. Every single credit card, every checking account, and every hidden fund you thought I did not know about is completely locked down by federal order. How are you going to pay your gambling bookie now, Sienna? Sienna stared at Andre with wide, terrified eyes. The reality of his words crashed down on her, shattering her entire world into a million jagged pieces. I legally froze all your accounts. Those words meant she had absolutely no way to pay the dangerous men she owed $300,000 to. Those men did not care about her country club membership or her designer clothes. They cared about cash, and Andre had just cut off her only supply. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her chest heaved as she began to hyperventilate right there in the middle of the executive boardroom. She looked down at her hands, which were shaking violently. Then she looked at the door, realizing she was trapped between a team of federal forensic accountants, a ruthless former prosecutor, and the looming threat of the violent bookies waiting for her outside. Catherine reached out and grabbed Sienna's arm, trying to pull her golden child back. "Keep your mouth shut, Catherine," hissed her voice low and frantic. "Do not say another word to them. My lawyer is on his way. We will fix this. We just need to get out of this building." Sienna violently yanked her arm out of her mother's grip. She stumbled backward, knocking a leather chair out of her way. "Fix this!" Sienna screamed, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "How are you going to fix this, Mom? Andre just seized every single dollar I have. The men from the South Side know where I live. They know where my kids sleep. They told me what they would do to me if I missed my payment today. I'm going to be killed because of you." Catherine stepped forward, her face pale with panic. She raised her hands, trying to calm her daughter down. "Sienna, stop talking right now. You are in a room full of federal investigators. You are incriminating yourself." But Sienna was completely unhinged. The sheer terror of her violent creditors and the terrifying presence of her husband had broken her completely. She did not care about family loyalty anymore. She only cared about saving her own skin. She pointed a trembling finger directly at Catherine's face. "Do not tell me to shut up!" Sienna shrieked, tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive makeup. "You did this to me. You are the one who told me I deserved that $1 million house in the suburbs. You told me to keep spending. You told me you would always cover my tracks. Tell them, Mom. Tell Andre it was your idea." My team of junior accountants sat in absolute stunned silence, typing every single word into their official transcripts. Mr. Bradley stood frozen by the door, watching a wealthy society family implode in his boardroom. Cole stood quietly in the corner, his arms crossed, watching the destruction unfold exactly as we had planned. I leaned forward in my chair, resting my elbows on the mahogany table. "Tell us what, Sienna?" I asked, my voice perfectly calm, contrasting sharply with her manic screaming. "What exactly did our mother do?" Catherine lunged toward Sienna, trying to cover her mouth. "Shut up, you foolish girl!" Catherine screamed, losing her elegant facade entirely. Sienna shoved her mother away with unexpected force. Catherine stumbled and fell hard onto the carpeted floor. "She stole the money," Sienna yelled, looking wildly between me and Andre. "She embezzled millions from the family charity. That is how she bought my house in the suburbs. She said the charity had too much cash sitting around doing nothing. She said nobody would ever check the ledgers. She filtered the money out of the charity and used it to buy my property in cash so Andre would not see a mortgage on my credit report." Catherine sat on the floor, her face buried in her hands, weeping in total defeat. Her own daughter had just handed the Internal Revenue Service a full verbal confession to massive charity fraud and embezzlement. Andre did not show a single ounce of surprise. As a seasoned prosecutor, he knew exactly how to extract the final piece of the puzzle. He picked up his dark leather briefcase and placed it on the table next to my red binder. He popped the latches and pulled out a thick stack of financial subpoenas. "If you want any hope of leniency," Sienna Andre said, his voice cutting through the room with absolute authority, "you are going to tell me exactly how she moved the funds." Charity money cannot just directly purchase residential real estate without triggering an immediate tax audit. She had to wash the money first. How did she do it? Sienna wiped her nose with the back of her hand, sobbing uncontrollably. She used an offshore account, Sienna confessed, her voice trembling. She told me she set up a shell account in the Cayman Islands years ago. She wired the charity money to the offshore account first and then wired it back into the country, disguised as a private family trust payout. That is how she bought the house. Andre flipped through his stack of official documents. His eyes scanned the pages of financial records he and I had spent the entire weekend legally tracing. He found the page he was looking for and pulled it out. An offshore account. Andre repeated, reading the document. I have a routing number here from a frozen wire transfer we intercepted last night. Let us verify if you are telling the truth, Sienna. Andre cleared his throat and read the numbers out loud, clearly and deliberately, so the junior accountants could record them for the federal transcript. Routing number 0482914, account number 7730159. The moment those numbers left Andre's mouth, the entire world stopped spinning. I froze. Every muscle in my body went completely rigid. The air in my lungs turned to ice. I stared at Andre, my mind racing, as those specific 14 digits echoed in my head. I knew those numbers. I knew them by heart. They were burned into my memory from a legal document I had read when I was 18 years old. It was not a random offshore shell account. It was not a generic holding company. I slowly turned my head and looked down at my mother, who was still sitting on the floor. The blood drained from my face. My hands began to shake, not from fear, but from a betrayal so profound and sickening, it felt like a physical knife twisting in my stomach. That is not an offshore account, I whispered, my voice cracking. Cole stepped away from the door, his eyes locking onto me, recognizing the sudden shift in my demeanor. Elise, he said softly, taking a step toward my chair. What is it? I stood up, pushing my heavy leather chair back. I looked at Catherine, who was refusing to meet my eyes. She was staring at the floor, her shoulders shaking. That routing number belongs to a protected medical trust fund, I said, my voice growing louder, trembling with raw, agonizing realization. It is the exact account number of the medical trust my late grandfather set up for me before he died. The money he left behind specifically designated to cover my future healthcare costs. The money you told me was lost in the stock market crash 10 years ago. The silence in the executive boardroom was deafening. The 14-digit routing number Andre had just read aloud hung in the air, like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I stared at my mother, who was still slumped on the floor. For years I had blamed the economy. I had blamed bad luck. I had blamed greedy financial advisors for wiping out the medical trust my late grandfather had set up for me. But it was not the stock market that stole my safety net. It was the woman sitting right in front of me. The memories of the last 2 years flashed through my mind with sickening clarity. I thought about the agonizing physical pain of 3 failed rounds of in vitro fertilization. I remembered sitting at my kitchen table at 2 in the morning crying over spreadsheets, trying to figure out which high-interest personal loans Cole and I could take out next just to afford the hormone injections. I remembered working 90-hour weeks while pumping my body full of synthetic medications, destroying my own health because we were so desperate for a child. We had nearly bankrupted ourselves. We had sacrificed everything we had built, and all that time the money my grandfather had explicitly left to protect me was sitting inside the walls of Sienna's $1 million suburban mansion. My mother had drained my medical fund, washed it through a charity she controlled, and used it to buy her golden child a luxury house in cash so Sienna could play the role of the perfect wealthy housewife. I stepped out from behind the heavy mahogany table. My junior accountant stopped typing. Mr. Bradley stood completely still by the door. Even Andre, the battle-hardened federal prosecutor, watched me with a quiet, guarded intensity as I walked over to where Catherine was sitting on the carpet. "Get up," I said. My voice was no longer loud. It was terrifyingly quiet. Catherine looked up at me. Her expensive pearl necklace was twisted and her perfect hair was a mess. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the edge of a leather chair for support. She tried to arrange her face into a mask of maternal authority, but the sheer panic in her eyes betrayed her. "Elise, you have to understand." Catherine started, her voice trembling. The market was volatile. The trust was losing value. I was just trying to protect the family assets by moving them into real estate. It was a business decision. A business decision, I repeated, taking a step closer. You stole millions of dollars from a protected medical trust. You watched Cole and me drown in debt. You watched me inject myself with hormones until I could barely stand. You watched my heart break every single time a transfer failed because we could barely afford the procedures. You watched me suffer and you never said a word. You took my future to buy your other daughter a house she did not earn. Thomas stepped forward, trying to shield his wife. "Now hold on a minute, Elise," he barked, attempting to regain control of the room. "Your mother did what she thought was best for the overall family portfolio. We were going to pay you back eventually. You do not understand how these things work." "I do not understand how forensic accounting works," I snapped, cutting him off entirely. "I track international money laundering rings for the federal government, Dad. I know exactly how this works. You used my medical fund as your personal piggy bank because you thought I was too stupid to ever find out." I turned my focus back to Catherine. I wanted to see a single ounce of remorse. I wanted to see the mother who had raised me show just a fraction of guilt for destroying my life to fund Sienna's vanity. "Tell me you are sorry," I demanded, staring directly into her eyes. "Tell me you regret watching me go into crippling debt while you handed my grandfather's money to Sienna." But Catherine did not apologize. The fear in her eyes suddenly hardened into something cold and resentful. The mask of the loving matriarch completely fell away, leaving only the toxic narcissistic core beneath. She straightened her posture and looked me up and down with absolute contempt. "Why should I apologize?" Catherine hissed, her voice dripping with venom. "Sienna was providing me with grandchildren. She was building a real family. She gave me beautiful twins to carry on our legacy. She deserved a house more than you deserved a science experiment." The words echoed off the glass walls of the boardroom. Even Sienna, who had been sobbing in the corner, gasped in shock at the sheer cruelty of our mother's statement. Andre clenched his jaw, his fists tightening at his sides. He looked at my mother like she was the most repulsive criminal he had ever encountered in his entire career. "You think throwing money at a fertility clinic was going to fix you?" Catherine continued, taking a step toward me. "You are broken, Elise. I took that money because it was being wasted. Sienna gave this family a future. You gave us nothing but medical bills and disappointment. I made the right choice. I protected the family legacy from your failure." She stood there breathing heavily, believing she had just delivered the ultimate killing blow. She expected me to break down. She expected me to cry and run out of the room, humiliated by my inability to have a child. That was how our dynamic had always worked. She would find my deepest vulnerability and weaponize it to establish her dominance, but I did not shed a single tear. The last remaining thread of love I had for the woman who gave birth to me snapped. There was no grief left. There was no sadness. There was only the cold, hard reality that the people standing in front of me were parasites, and I knew exactly how to exterminate parasites. I looked at Catherine with complete emotional detachment. I did not yell back. I did not defend my choices or my body. I simply turned around and walked back to the head of the conference table. I reached out and closed the thick red forensic audit binder with a loud, definitive thud. I looked past my mother, past my father, and past my trembling sister. I locked eyes with my husband Cole, who was standing guard by the boardroom doors. His dark eyes were burning with a fierce protective rage waiting for my command. "Cole," I said, my voice perfectly calm and lethal. "Initiate the Pandora Protocol." Cole did not hesitate for a single second. He had been waiting for this exact command since the moment I discovered the missing funds from my medical trust. He reached into his dark jacket, pulled out a matte black encrypted laptop, and set it down heavily on the mahogany conference table. He opened the lid and his fingers began flying across the keyboard with a terrifying mechanical precision. The large digital presentation screen mounted on the wall behind me flared to life. The firm logo vanished, replaced by a stark black background filled with cascading lines of code. Pandora is live. Cole announced, his voice echoing in the dead silent room. Andre immediately stepped forward to join him. The former federal prosecutor reached into his pocket and produced a secure government-issued authentication drive. He plugged it directly into the side of Cole's laptop. By the authority vested in me as special counsel for the Internal Revenue Service, Andre stated, his deep voice ringing with absolute authority, I am legally authorizing the bypass of all commercial banking firewalls associated with these accounts. Execute the trace, Cole. My parents watched in absolute horror as the giant screen on the wall transformed into a massive digital map. Bright red lines began shooting across the display, connecting bank accounts, shell companies, and offshore holdings in real time. It was a visual representation of their entire criminal empire being dismantled piece by piece. We watched as the red lines traced the exact path of my stolen medical trust fund. The data proved beyond a shadow of a doubt how Catherine had illegally drained my grandfather's money, funneled it through the family charity foundation as a fabricated operational expense, and then washed it through a domestic LLC to purchase Sienna's suburban mansion in pure cash. Every single fraudulent wire transfer, every forged signature, and every hidden routing number was exposed right there on the wall for everyone in the room to see. My mother stood frozen, her eyes wide as she stared at the undeniable proof of her betrayal. She could no longer gaslight me. She could no longer manipulate the narrative or claim she was protecting the family assets. The digital footprint was permanent, and it was entirely damning. But my father, Thomas, reacted differently. He did not look at the screen with remorse or guilt. He looked at it with the frantic desperation of a cornered animal realizing the trap had completely snapped shut. While Catherine and Sienna were busy staring at the wall, Thomas slowly began backing away. He retreated toward the far corner of the executive boardroom, trying to put as much distance between himself and Andre as possible. I watched him out of the corner of my eye. His hands were shaking as he hurriedly pulled his phone from his pocket. His face was slick with a cold sweat. He was not trying to call his lawyers. He was trying to save himself. Thomas knew that once the IRS officially logged these findings, every single domestic asset tied to his name would be frozen and seized to pay for the massive tax evasion and embezzlement restitution. He knew he was going to lose his house, his cars, and his entire real estate company. But he still had one last lifeline. He had exactly $2 million of liquid cash sitting in a corporate operational account that had not been flagged yet. With trembling fingers, Thomas opened a secure banking application on his phone. He frantically began typing in his account credentials, desperately trying to initiate a wire transfer to send that final $2 million to an untraceable bank in the Cayman Islands. He was completely willing to drain the last of the company funds and leave his wife and his golden child behind to face the federal charges alone. He thought he was being stealthy. He thought the chaos in the room was providing him with the perfect cover. He was entirely wrong. Cole's dark eyes flicked away from his laptop screen. He stared straight at my father across the room. A sharp warning tone chimed from the computer speakers, cutting through the tension. We have an active outgoing wire request, Cole said, his voice dripping with lethal satisfaction. Target destination is a private financial institution in Grand Cayman. The sender is Thomas. He is attempting to move $2 million out of the primary charity operating account. Catherine whipped her head around and stared at her husband. Thomas, you are draining the charity account, she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure disbelief. You are leaving us with nothing. Thomas ignored her. He kept his head down, tapping furiously on his phone screen, trying to force the transaction through before the system caught up with him. Just 10 more seconds was all he needed. Just one final confirmation tap to move the money out of federal jurisdiction. Andre did not even blink. The prosecutor simply reached into his suit jacket and pulled out his own phone. I had a federal judge on standby all morning for this exact scenario, Andre declared, his voice projecting absolute power. I am submitting the electronic emergency asset freeze right now. Andre tapped his screen once. He looked up, locking eyes with my sweating, panicking father. Federal injunction granted, Andre stated. Lock him out, Cole. Cole hit the enter key on his laptop with a loud, definitive crack. Across the room, Thomas slammed his thumb down on his phone screen, hitting the final transfer button. He let out a breathless gasp of relief, thinking he had beaten the clock. He stared at his phone, waiting for the green confirmation checkmark to appear. Instead, the screen flashed a brilliant, aggressive red. Thomas stared in utter devastation as a bold warning message popped up on his display. Transaction denied, federal seizure. The phone slipped from his trembling hands and hit the carpeted floor. The $2 million was gone, permanently locked inside the frozen account. He had absolutely nothing left. No money, no escape route, and no power. He looked up, his face completely drained of color as the reality of his total ruin crashed down upon him. A second later, a sharp, heavy knock echoed against the frosted glass of the boardroom doors. Andre walked over and pulled the heavy mahogany doors open. He stood tall and unyielding, stepping aside to reveal the hallway. Flanking the doorway stood two agents from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters FBI printed across their chests. They stepped into the boardroom, their expressions grim and entirely professional. The fallout from the Pandora Protocol was immediate and utterly devastating. By Tuesday morning, the federal asset freeze had triggered a domino effect across every financial institution tied to my family. Banks do not wait politely when the Internal Revenue Service issues a seizure notice. They move with ruthless mechanical speed to protect their own liabilities. For Sienna, that meant her perfect, wealthy suburban fantasy imploded before she even had time to pack a designer suitcase. I sat in my downtown office watching the events unfold through the digital alerts Cole had set up on my encrypted tablet. At 9 in the morning, a fleet of bank creditors and foreclosure agents descended upon Sienna's massive estate in the suburbs. Neighbors who usually peeked through their custom blinds to admire Sienna's landscaping were now treated to the sight of commercial tow trucks backing into her pristine driveway. According to the security logs we intercepted, the repo men took her luxury SUV first. Then they slapped bright orange foreclosure notices across the custom mahogany front doors of the house my mother had bought her with my stolen medical funds. Sienna was reportedly screaming at the men in the front yard, demanding they stop threatening to call the police. But the police could not help her. The creditors had a federal judge's signature. She had absolutely no access to cash. Andre had legally locked down every joint account and credit card, leaving her with nothing but the spare change in her purse. But losing her cars and facing eviction was only the beginning of her nightmare. Just as the tow trucks were pulling away, a sleek sports car parked illegally on the curb outside her property. Out stepped the country club tennis coach. He was a tall, athletic man in his late 20s who had been enjoying a very comfortable arrangement as Sienna's secret lover and the biological father of her twins. He did not come to comfort her. He came to collect his hush money. Through the audio recordings captured by the smart doorbell camera on the property, we heard exactly how that conversation went. The coach marched right past the foreclosure signs and backed Sienna against one of the stone pillars on her porch. He was furious. His monthly direct deposit from the charity accounts had bounced that morning thanks to the federal freeze. He told her he did not care about her tax evasion problems. He demanded his $50,000 silence fee by the end of the week. If she failed to pay, he promised to take the story straight to the Chicago Society blogs and the local press. He threatened to sell the paternity test results to the highest bidder, exposing her as a fraud and ruining whatever was left of her reputation. Sienna was completely trapped. She could not ask our mother for money because Catherine was currently under federal investigation and her assets were also frozen. She could not manipulate Andre because the former prosecutor was already preparing to obliterate her in family court. She had nowhere left to turn, except to the sister she had spent her entire life tormenting. By 8 o'clock that night, a massive thunderstorm had rolled into Chicago. The rain was coming down in sheets, flooding the streets and rattling against the windows of the townhouse Cole and I shared. We were sitting in the living room drinking tea and going over the latest audit files when a frantic, desperate pounding echoed from our heavy wooden front door. Cole looked up from his laptop, his jaw tightening. I placed my mug on the coffee table and walked toward the entryway. I checked the security camera monitor mounted on the wall. Sienna was standing on my front porch, completely drenched by the pouring rain. Her expensive blonde hair was plastered to her face, and her mascara was running down her cheeks in dark, muddy streaks. She looked entirely pathetic. I opened the door. The cold wind whipped into the hallway, but I did not step aside to let her in. I stood blocking the entrance, holding a stack of legal documents in one hand and a steaming mug of tea in the other. "Elise." "Please," Sienna begged, shivering violently in the storm. Her teeth were actually chattering. "You have to let me in. You have to help me. I have nowhere else to go. Andre will not answer my calls and Mom is ignoring me. The bank took my car and the house is being foreclosed on." I took a slow sip of my tea. I did not offer her a towel. "It sounds like you are having a difficult day, Sienna," I said, my voice perfectly level, contrasting sharply with her frantic sobbing. "Please do not do this to me," she cried, grabbing the edge of the doorframe with white knuckles. "I know I was awful to you. I know I should have stopped Mom from taking your medical money. But I am your sister. I am desperate. The tennis coach came to the house today. He says he is going to the press if I do not pay him $50,000 to keep quiet about the twins. He is going to destroy me, Elise." She dropped to her knees, right there on the wet concrete of my porch. The golden child who had spent her entire life looking down on me from her pedestal was now groveling at my feet in the freezing rain. "Just give me a loan," Sienna pleaded, looking up at me with wild, terrified eyes. "You are a senior partner now. You have the money. Just loan me enough to pay him off and stop the bank from taking the house. I swear I will pay you back. I will do whatever you want. Please, Elise, save my house." I looked down at the woman who had laughed when my mother called me a barren failure. I looked at the woman who was perfectly happy to live in a mansion funded by the money meant to cover my agonizing fertility treatments. There was no pity in my heart. There was only the cold, hard execution of ultimate accountability. I stepped closer to the edge of the doorway. I looked directly down into her desperate, tear-filled eyes. "I am not giving you a loan, Sienna," I said, my voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper that cut straight through the sound of the pouring rain. "But I did just buy your mortgage directly from the bank at a steep discount." Sienna stared at me through the driving rain. Her mouth hung open, but the sound of the storm drowned out whatever excuse she was trying to formulate. I had just told her I owned the debt on the very house she was currently being evicted from. I owned her failure. Before her panic could transition into another hysterical plea for mercy, a pair of blinding headlights swept across my manicured lawn. A silver sports car hopped the curb and skidded to a halt right behind my husband's sedan in the driveway. The driver's side door flew open. A tall, muscular man in a soaked designer tracksuit stormed up my front walkway. It was the tennis coach. He had clearly tracked Sienna's phone or followed her tow truck-ravaged car all the way from the suburbs. He did not care whose property he was trespassing on. He only cared about his money. "You think you can just run away from me, Sienna?" he shouted, his voice cutting through the heavy thunder. Sienna let out a choked gasp and backed up against my brick exterior wall, attempting to make herself as small as possible. "I told you I am not playing games," the coach yelled, marching up the stone steps until he was standing just inches away from the edge of my porch. "My bank app says your transfer bounced. You promised me 50 grand today. If I do not have cash in my hand by midnight, I am sending the paternity clinic results to the Chicago Tribune. I will tag every single board member at the country club. I will ruin you." I took a sip of my tea, watching the scene unfold with absolute detachment. Sienna was trembling so violently, she looked like she might collapse. She turned to me, begging with wide, terrified eyes. "Elise, please," Sienna cried, grabbing the sleeve of my cardigan. "Just give him the money. I will sign whatever you want. I will give you the rights to the house. Just make him go away." I looked down at her hand, ruining the fabric of my sweater. You do not have the rights to the house anymore, Sienna, I reminded her coldly. And I am not in the business of paying off your extortionists. The tennis coach took another aggressive step forward, raising a fist toward the porch. I do not care who pays me, he barked, looking between the two of us. One of you rich snobs better wire the funds right now, or the whole city finds out her precious twins are mine. He never got the chance to make another threat. The heavy oak door behind me swung open completely. Andre stepped out onto the porch. The former federal prosecutor wore a dark tailored shirt and slacks, his imposing frame taking up the entire doorway. As a Black American man who had spent his entire career dismantling violent organized crime rings and corrupt corporate executives, Andre did not possess an ounce of fear. He radiated a cold, calculated authority that immediately suffocated the oxygen on the porch. He walked past me and stood directly in front of the tennis coach. Andre was easily 3 inches taller and significantly broader. The coach froze his raised fist, slowly lowering to his side as he realized exactly who he was screaming at. He had seen Andre at the country club. He knew whose wife he had been sleeping with. Andre looked down at the man with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. You are trespassing on my sister-in-law's property, Andre stated, his deep voice entirely level despite the roaring storm around them. And you are openly engaging in criminal extortion in front of 3 witnesses. The coach swallowed hard, taking a slight step back down the wet stairs. Look, man, I am just trying to get what is owed to me. She made an agreement. She promised to pay for my silence. An agreement. Andre repeated, his tone dropping into a lethal prosecutorial cadence. You mean a blackmail arrangement? Let me educate you on how the federal justice system views your specific business model. Under Title 18, United States Code Section 873, demanding money under the threat of exposing a scandal is classified as blackmail. Because you demanded this payment via text messages and bank transfers, crossing state server lines, you have also triggered federal wire fraud statutes. The tennis coach lost all his aggressive swagger. The color drained from his face as the rain plastered his hair to his forehead. He looked from Andre to Sienna, and then back to Andre, realizing he had walked directly into a legal slaughterhouse. That is a felony carrying a maximum sentence of up to 20 years in federal prison. Andre continued, stepping right to the edge of the porch, so he was looking down directly at the trembling man. I have personal friends in the United States Attorney's Office who would love to make an example out of a country club predator targeting wealthy families. I can have a squad car here in 3 minutes to arrest you for extortion and trespassing. Do you want to test my connections tonight? The coach panicked completely. The reality of facing 2 decades in a federal penitentiary broke his arrogant facade instantly. He raised his hands in the air, backing away toward his sports car. Wait, hold on! The coach stammered, his voice pitching up in terror. I did not mean it like that. I do not want any trouble with the feds. I am just a guy trying to get paid. She is the one who dragged me into this mess. She is the criminal, not me. He fumbled frantically in his soaking wet tracksuit pockets. He pulled out his smartphone and practically shoved it toward Andre. I can prove it, the coach yelled, desperate to save his own skin. I have the receipts. She is the one breaking the law. She has been paying me hush money for 8 months using corporate accounts. She paid me to keep quiet using checks from your family's charity. Sienna let out a blood-curdling shriek. Shut up, you idiot, she screamed, lunging forward, but Andre effortlessly blocked her path with one arm. Andre reached out and took the unlocked phone from the shaking coach. He looked down at the bright screen. His eyes scanned the digital banking receipts and the photographed checks the coach had saved as leverage. I stood on the porch, my teacup pausing halfway to my mouth. A slow, sharp smile spread across my face. Sienna had not just cheated on her husband. She had not just lied about the paternity of her children. To cover up her tracks, she had actively participated in my mother's massive embezzlement scheme, pulling directly from the philanthropic foundation to fund her dirty secrets. Andre turned around and handed the phone directly to me. I looked at the high-resolution images of the charity checks bearing my mother's forged signature and Sienna's endorsement. More ironclad evidence had just dropped right into my lap. The digital evidence on the tennis coach's phone was the final nail in the coffin. Andre legally secured the device, placing it directly into a federal evidence bag he kept in his vehicle. The photographs of those charity checks forged by my mother and endorsed by Sienna completely destroyed any remaining defense they had. It was undeniable proof of conspiracy and embezzlement. By Wednesday afternoon, the IRS had everything they needed to prepare formal federal indictments. My mother knew her time was running out, and her desperation began to make her careless. On Thursday morning, I received a priority courier package at my office. Inside was an invitation from Catherine for a private peace dinner at an exclusive high-end steakhouse downtown. The note attached was written in her elegant cursive, begging for a chance to make things right before the family was permanently destroyed. She wanted to meet on neutral ground, just the two of us, to discuss a mutually beneficial solution. I showed the note to Cole when I got home. He did not tell me to stay away. He simply smiled, tapped his computer keyboard, and told me he would make sure I went into that dinner with all the leverage I could ever need. I arrived at the restaurant wearing a sharp navy suit. Catherine was already seated at a secluded corner table far away from the other patrons. She looked absolutely terrible. The stress of the impending federal audit had aged her 10 years in a matter of days. She wore a dark dress and her hands were trembling slightly as she held her wine glass. She tried to offer a warm maternal smile when I sat down, but it looked more like a grimace of pure panic. "Elise, thank you for coming," Catherine said, her voice shaking with manufactured emotion. "I know you have every right to hate me. I know I made terrible mistakes. But please, you have to listen to what I have to offer tonight. I did not touch the menu. I did not order a drink. I simply folded my hands on the pristine white tablecloth and stared at her. "I am listening," I said coldly. Catherine reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick, crisp manila envelope. She placed it on the table and pushed it slowly toward me. She looked around nervously before leaning in close. "I am cutting Sienna off completely," Catherine whispered, her tone dripping with sudden venom toward her former golden child. "She is reckless and stupid. She brought that extortionist to your door and exposed the charity. I am completely washing my hands of her. She ruined everything." I looked at the envelope. "What is this?" I asked. "It is my newly drafted notarized will," Catherine said, puffing her chest out slightly. "I spent the entire morning with my estate lawyers. I have officially disinherited Sienna. If you open that envelope, you will see that I am leaving the entire commercial real estate empire, the investment portfolios, and all remaining properties directly to you. You get everything, Elise. You win." I did not reach for the envelope. I let it sit there on the table between us. "You are offering me the entire family empire?" I asked, my voice perfectly flat. "Why?" "Because you proved you are the only one capable of running it," Catherine said, forcing a tear to well up in her eye. "You are strong and brilliant. I was wrong to ever doubt you. You are the daughter who deserves my legacy. But Elise, you have to stop the audit." There it was, the ultimate desperate bribe. "You have to call off your forensic accounting team," Catherine pleaded, her voice pitching up in desperation. "You have to tell Andre to drop the federal investigation. You have the power to make this go away. If you stop the IRS from looking into the charity accounts, the entire empire is yours. We can be a real family again. We can run the business together, and when I pass away, every single asset belongs to you. Just take the deal, Elise." I finally reached out and pulled the manila envelope toward me. I opened the flap and slid the heavy legal documents out. They looked incredibly official. The pages were stamped with a notary seal, and my name was printed boldly as the sole heir and executor of her vast estate. To anyone else, it would have looked like the ultimate victory. It looked like the golden child had been dethroned, and the scapegoat had finally been crowned the rightful heir. But I was not just anyone. I was a senior forensic accountant who spent my entire career dealing with desperate cornered criminals. And my husband was an elite cybersecurity expert who knew exactly how to track those criminals. "You went to your lawyer's office this morning to draft this?" I asked, running my finger over the fresh ink of the notary stamp. "Yes," Catherine answered eagerly, nodding her head. "I drove there first thing. I wanted to make sure it was legally binding before I sat down with you tonight. I want you to feel completely secure, Elise." I slid the documents back into the envelope. I reached into my suit pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I placed the phone flat on the table right next to the fake will. Cole is incredibly gifted at what he does, I said, my voice dropping into a lethal whisper. When you started trying to hide money earlier this week, he decided to take some extra precautions. He legally accessed the cloud storage backups for your luxury SUV's dashcam. He wanted to make sure you were not moving physical assets out of your properties. Catherine's eager smile instantly froze. The color drained from her cheeks. The internal cabin microphone on your car records everything automatically. I continued tapping the screen of my phone to unlock it, especially when you use your car's Bluetooth to make phone calls while driving, like the phone call you made to my father on the way back from your lawyer's office this morning. Catherine lunged forward, trying to grab my phone off the table. I smoothly pulled it out of her reach, pressing the play button. I turned the volume all the way up so the audio played clearly across our secluded table. Catherine's own voice, arrogant and deeply malicious, echoed from the small speaker. We will give Elise the fake will, and the minute she drops the IRS audit, we will disinherit her again and move the assets to Dubai. The recording stopped playing. The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. Catherine stared at my smartphone as if it were a venomous snake resting on the white tablecloth. The color had completely vanished from her face. Her perfectly applied makeup suddenly looked like a fragile mask cracking under the sheer weight of her own exposed deceit. I sat perfectly still, watching her process the fact that she had just been caught in the ultimate trap. For my entire life, my mother had relied on her ability to manipulate the narrative. She twisted words, denied reality, and gaslighted everyone around her to maintain control. But she could not gaslight a digital audio recording. She could not deny the sound of her own voice plotting to disinherit me and flee the country with stolen assets the exact second she got what she wanted. Elise, you have to understand. Catherine stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the edge of the table to steady herself. That conversation was taken entirely out of context. Your father was panicking this morning. I only said those things to calm him down. I never actually intended to disinherit you again. I swear to you this will sitting right here is my true intention. I did not argue with her. I did not raise my voice to point out the absurdity of her lies. Instead, I reached across the table and picked up the heavy manila envelope containing the fraudulent legal documents. I slid the thick stack of expensive watermarked paper out of the casing. I held the freshly notarized will in my hands, feeling the weight of the lies printed on those pages. Catherine watched me with wide, desperate eyes, hoping against hope that my lifelong conditioning to seek her approval would magically override the irrefutable proof of her betrayal. I gripped the top of the documents. With one slow, deliberate motion, I tore the entire stack in half. The sharp, crisp sound of the thick paper ripping echoed loudly in our secluded corner of the steakhouse. Catherine's mouth dropped open in pure shock. She let out a choked gasp, reaching her hand out instinctively as if she could somehow stop me. I did not stop. I placed the torn halves together and ripped them again, quartering the fake promises she had tried to sell me. I kept my eyes locked directly on hers the entire time. There was no anger in my gaze. There was only the cold, absolute certainty of a woman who was permanently severing the toxic cord that had bound her for 34 years. When the legal documents were reduced to a handful of jagged, meaningless scraps, I held my hand over her bowl of expensive lobster bisque. I opened my fingers and let the shredded pieces of her fake will flutter down. They landed in the hot soup, instantly soaking up the rich broth and sinking to the bottom as a soggy, ruined mess. Catherine stared at her ruined soup. The reality of her failure finally bypassed her denial and ignited a furious, explosive rage. The desperate, pleading mother vanished instantly, replaced by the vicious, vindictive narcissist I had known my entire life. She slammed both her hands down on the table, rattling the silverware and causing her wineglass to tip dangerously. "You ungrateful, arrogant little wretch!" Catherine hissed, her voice shaking with raw, unfiltered hatred. "You think you have won because of some stolen audio clip? You think you can humiliate me and walk away unscathed? You have absolutely no idea who you are dealing with, Elise." She leaned across the table, her face twisting into an ugly sneer. "I run the high society in this city," Catherine spat. I sit on the charity boards with the wives of every major bank executive and corporate partner in Chicago. You think your new promotion makes you powerful. I will drag your name through the mud so thoroughly you will wish you had never been born. I will personally call every single client at your accounting firm and tell them you are a manipulative, unstable thief. I will ensure no financial institution in this entire state ever hires you again. I will destroy your career and leave you with nothing. I sat back in my chair and watched her unravel. Her threats were loud and vicious, but they were completely empty. She was clinging to a social hierarchy that was already burning to the ground around her. She truly believed her country club status and her stolen wealth made her invincible. She had no idea that the federal government was already dismantling her empire brick by brick. I let her scream. I let her spew her toxic threats and promise my ultimate ruin because I knew something she did not. I knew exactly what Andre and Cole had been finalizing with the federal judge while I was sitting here listening to her fake apologies. Right in the middle of Catherine's furious rant, my smartphone buzzed against the wooden table. The screen lit up with an urgent breaking news notification. I looked down at the display. I read the headline and a slow, sharp smile spread across my face. The timing was absolutely flawless. I picked up my phone. Catherine stopped yelling, breathing heavily as she glared at me, waiting for me to show some sign of fear or intimidation. Instead, I simply turned my phone around and pushed it across the table so the bright screen was facing her directly. "I think you should read this before you make any more calls to your society friends," I said, my voice dropping into a lethal calm. Catherine squinted at the bright screen. It was an emergency news alert from the Chicago Tribune. I watched her eyes scan the bold black text of the headline. I watched the remaining blood drain from her face as her entire world completely collapsed. "Your husband's federal indictment just went live on the front page, Mother," I said, watching her expression shift into pure, unadulterated horror. "Society does not care about you anymore." The consequences of tearing up a fraudulent will and threatening a senior forensic accountant did not take long to materialize. By Tuesday morning, the Internal Revenue Service moved with swift and devastating precision. I sat in the passenger seat of Cole's car, parked discreetly at the end of the long, sweeping driveway of my parents' primary luxury estate in the wealthy northern suburbs of Chicago. We watched as a fleet of dark, unmarked SUVs and two massive commercial moving trucks pulled up to the wrought iron gates. The gates, which were usually operated by a private security guard, were bypassed entirely by federal agents bearing a stack of warrants signed by a federal judge. I stepped out of the car and walked up the driveway. Andre had arranged for me to be present on site as a consulting forensic financial expert. My specific role was to identify and verify high-value assets that had been purchased using the stolen charity money and my drained medical trust fund. Walking through the grand double doors of the house I grew up in, I expected to feel some lingering sense of nostalgia or perhaps a twinge of sadness. Instead, I felt absolutely nothing. The massive house, with its vaulted ceilings and imported Italian marble floors, was no longer a family home. It was simply a multi-million-dollar crime scene. Inside the foyer, absolute chaos had erupted. Asset forfeiture agents in dark windbreakers were moving methodically through the house carrying clipboards and sheets of bright red asset seizure tags. They were cataloging everything of value to cover the massive tax evasion and embezzlement debts my parents had accrued. My father Thomas was standing in the center of the living room, his face purple with rage. He was shouting at a lead federal agent demanding to call his lawyers and threatening to sue the entire federal government for harassment. The agent, completely unfazed, simply handed my father a thick stack of court orders detailing the freezing and immediate seizure of all physical property. Thomas looked down at the paperwork and the fight instantly drained out of him. He sank onto a velvet sofa, staring blankly at the floor as agents began placing red tags on his expensive imported furniture. My mother, Catherine, was in a state of total hysterical panic. She was running back and forth between the dining room and the kitchen, watching agents catalog her fine china, her crystal chandeliers, and her extensive collection of designer handbags. For a woman who had built her entire identity around her material wealth and her elevated social status. Watching the government box up her prestige in cheap brown cardboard was a fate worse than death. I stood quietly near the entryway, observing the dismantling of their fraudulent empire, but as I watched the agents move into the east wing of the house, I noticed my mother suddenly slip away from the commotion. She stopped crying, checked over her shoulder to see if any agents were watching her, and darted down a narrow hallway that led to my father's private back study. I knew my mother better than she knew herself. She was not running away to hide and cry. She was going after something specific. I signaled to the lead IRS agent, pointing silently down the hallway. He nodded and followed closely behind me as I walked softly down the carpeted corridor. When I reached the open doorway of the private study, I stopped and watched. Catherine was standing on a leather chair, frantically reaching up to unhook a large framed canvas from the wall. It was a breathtaking landscape of the Maine coastline, painted entirely in rich, vibrant oils. It was an original piece created by my late grandfather. It was also the only item in this entire hollow, sterile mansion that held any genuine emotional value. When I was a little girl, my grandfather used to sit me on his lap and let me trace the dried brushstrokes with my small fingers. When he passed away, I had begged my mother to let me keep the painting in my bedroom to remember him. Catherine had refused. She told me I was too clumsy and would ruin it. But that was a lie. Years later, when she needed a quick influx of cash to fund one of Sienna's lavish teenage pageants, she secretly sold my grandfather's painting to a private art dealer. What Catherine did not know was that I had spent the last week tracing every single transaction she ever made. I knew that 5 years ago, when my mother wanted to project an image of old money heritage to her new country club friends, she tracked down that exact same art dealer. She bought the painting back for an exorbitant premium, and she used the stolen funds from my medical trust to pay for it. Catherine struggled under the weight of the heavy wooden frame. She stepped down from the chair and hurriedly laid the painting flat on my father's desk. She pulled a thick moving blanket out of a closet and began wrapping the artwork tightly. Her breathing was shallow and frantic. She planned to smuggle the canvas out through the attached garage, load it into the trunk of a guest car, and sell it on the black market to fund her escape. It was her final desperate attempt to hold on to a piece of stolen wealth. She grabbed the wrapped canvas, hugging it tightly to her chest, and turned toward the garage access door. She froze. I stepped fully into the doorway of the study, blocking her only exit. The lead federal agent stepped up right beside me, his badge clearly visible on his belt. Catherine's eyes went wide with pure terror. She took a step backward, clutching the heavy canvas so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Elise," she gasped, her voice cracking. "Please, you have to let me take this. It is a family heirloom. It is the only thing I have left of my father. You cannot let them take it. It belongs to our family." I looked at the woman who had watched me agonize over crippling medical debts. I looked at the woman who had happily drained my future to buy my sister a mansion. I stepped into the room holding out my hand. My expression was perfectly blank. "That painting was purchased with funds from my medical trust," I said, my voice echoing with a cold, lethal finality. Catherine shook her head, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes, as the inescapable reality of her total ruin crashed down upon her. She tried to hold on to the frame, but the federal agent stepped forward, placing his hand firmly on the wrapped canvas. Defeated and completely broken, Catherine let go. Her hands shook violently as she backed away. I reached out and took the artwork directly from the agent, legally confiscating the only thing I ever truly wanted right out of my mother's shaking hands. The wheels of federal justice grind exceedingly fine, and once they start turning, they do not stop for anyone. 3 weeks after the Internal Revenue Service seized my parents' estate, the grand jury handed down a staggering 47-count indictment. Wire fraud, tax evasion, conspiracy, and embezzlement. The sheer volume of the forensic evidence Cole and I provided left their defense attorneys completely paralyzed. But the most devastating blow to my parents' criminal empire did not come from me. It came from their golden child. Sienna was facing up to 20 years in federal prison for her role in endorsing the forged charity checks and participating in the offshore money laundering scheme. She had no access to Andre's wealth. She had no house, no cars, and no country club friends left to bail her out. Faced with the terrifying reality of wearing a neon orange jumpsuit for the next 2 decades, my sister did exactly what narcissistic survivalists always do. She folded. Sienna signed a comprehensive plea agreement. She officially turned state's witness, agreeing to testify fully and truthfully against Catherine and Thomas in open court in exchange for immunity from federal incarceration. I was at the Dirksen Federal Courthouse in downtown Chicago on a rainy Tuesday morning to deliver a final set of audited ledgers to the prosecution team. Cole walked beside me, his presence a constant steadying force. As we rounded the corner of the heavy marble corridor on the 14th floor, we walked directly into a scene of absolute devastation. My parents had just stepped out of a grueling pre-trial conference. They looked completely unrecognizable. The affluent, powerful society couple was gone. Thomas looked haggard, his posture slumped, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his thinning frame. Catherine looked even worse. Without her private stylists and unlimited credit cards, her hair was flat and her face was lined with deep, exhausted shadows. Sienna was standing near the bank of elevators, clutching a cheap paper coffee cup alongside her court-appointed public defender. When Catherine saw her oldest daughter standing with the federal prosecutors, the last remaining shred of her sanity completely snapped. "You spineless traitor, Catherine," hissed her voice echoing sharply against the cold marble walls. Sienna flinched, spilling hot coffee over her hands, but she did not back down. She looked at our mother with a mixture of terror and bitter resentment. "I am not going to federal prison for you, Mom," Sienna yelled back, her voice cracking. "I am not taking the fall for your offshore accounts. You dragged me into this mess, and I am getting myself out." Catherine lunged forward, but Thomas grabbed her arm, holding her back. The federal marshals standing nearby immediately put their hands on their duty belts, warning my mother to step back. "I gave you everything," Catherine screamed, fighting against my father's grip. "I bought you that mansion. I paid for your luxurious life. I stole from your own sister just to make sure you had the world handed to you on a silver platter. And you sold me out to the federal government to save your own pathetic skin. You are dead to me, Sienna. Do you hear me? You are no longer my daughter." I stood quietly with Cole, watching the golden child and the matriarch tear each other to pieces. The beautiful, flawless relationship they had paraded in front of me for 34 years was finally exposed for what it truly was. It was a transaction, a hollow business arrangement built on stolen money and superficial status. And the moment the money ran out, the love vanished with it. Sienna threw her coffee cup into a nearby trash can. Tears began streaming down her face, ruining her cheap makeup. She pointed a shaking finger right at Catherine's face. "You made me this way," Sienna shrieked, her voice echoing with raw, agonizing truth. "You raised me to be a greedy monster. You taught me to lie. You taught me that money and status were the only things that mattered in this world. You bought me that house with stolen cash and told me I deserved it. You turned me into a parasite, Mom, and now you are mad that I'm acting like one to survive." Catherine stared at her golden child, her mouth opening and closing without making a sound. The realization that she had engineered her own destruction by spoiling and enabling a sociopath finally hit her. She had raised a daughter with absolutely zero loyalty. Thomas grabbed Catherine's shoulders and roughly steered her toward the opposite bank of elevators. The defense attorneys hurried them away, eager to prevent any further self-incrimination in front of the federal marshals. Sienna was left standing in the hallway, hyperventilating. She leaned her back against the cold marble wall and slid down until she was sitting on the floor, sobbing into her hands. She thought she had hit rock bottom. She thought her betrayal had at least guaranteed her survival. She was wrong. The heavy oak doors of a nearby family court chamber swung open. Andre stepped out into the hallway. The former federal prosecutor looked absolutely immaculate in a dark, tailored suit, carrying a thick leather binder. He walked down the corridor, his footsteps echoing with deliberate, terrifying precision. He stopped right in front of where Sienna was sitting on the floor. Sienna looked up, wiping her eyes. A desperate, pathetic glimmer of hope flashed across her face. She scrambled to her feet, trying to arrange her features into something resembling an apology. She reached her hand out toward him. "Andre, I did it!" Sienna cried, her voice pitching up into a frantic plea. "I signed the plea deal. I did the right thing. I am cooperating with the prosecutors just like you wanted. I am not going to jail Andre. I am going to be okay. We can figure this out." Andre did not reach out to take her hand. He did not offer her a single ounce of warmth or forgiveness. He looked down at the woman who had lied to him, betrayed him, and used his name to cover up a massive criminal conspiracy. His dark eyes were as cold and unforgiving as the marble floor beneath them. "Your cooperation keeps you out of federal prison," Sienna Andre said, his voice perfectly flat and lethal. "But the family court judge just granted me full permanent sole custody of the twins. You are out." The federal justice system moves with a cold, mechanical efficiency when it comes to recouping stolen money. 6 months after that brutal confrontation in the courthouse hallway, my parents' entire world was literally put on the auction block. The Internal Revenue Service does not care about your social standing or your country club memberships. They care about liquidating assets to cover massive tax evasion and embezzlement restitution. The public auction was held in a massive, sterile exhibition hall in downtown Chicago. It was a humiliating downgrade from the exclusive private events my parents used to attend. Rows of cheap folding chairs replaced plush velvet seating. The items up for bid were not displayed with artistic lighting or careful curation. They were tagged with bright red federal seizure stickers and cataloged with ruthless government efficiency. Luxury vehicles, vintage wine collections, imported Italian furniture, and the remnants of their fraudulent commercial real estate empire were all lined up like evidence in a massive financial crime. I stood near the back entrance of the exhibition hall with Cole observing the crowd before making our official presence known. Thomas and Catherine were already there. They had not come to bid because they had absolutely zero capital left to their names. They stood huddled in the far back corner of the drafty room, forced by some morbid masochistic compulsion to watch the total liquidation of their fabricated legacy. Catherine wore a plain beige coat that looked completely out of place on her previously glamorous frame. Her posture was rigid but utterly defeated. Thomas stood next to her, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of a cheap off-the-rack suit. They looked like ghosts haunting the graveyard of their own boundless greed. But the most poetic justice of the morning belonged to my sister. Sienna had managed to avoid a federal prison sentence by turning state's witness against our parents. But the federal judge who approved her plea deal did not let her walk away completely unpunished. She was hit with massive financial penalties and ordered to complete 2,000 hours of court-mandated community service. She also had to secure legitimate employment to pay off her remaining court fees now that she was entirely cut off from Andres' wealth. I looked toward the side of the exhibition hall, where a long catering table had been set up for the auction attendees. Sienna was standing behind the folding table wearing a stiff, uncomfortable black uniform and a hideous red polyester apron. Her expensive blonde hair was pulled back into a messy, practical bun. She was handing out tiny paper cups of cheap coffee and arranging dry pastries on plastic trays. The former golden child who used to sip vintage champagne in a $1 million suburban mansion funded by my stolen medical trust was now serving stale coffee to the bargain hunters preparing to buy her repossessed luxury vehicles. I watched a wealthy socialite whom Sienna used to desperately try to impress walk up to the catering table. The woman looked at Sienna, recognized her immediately, and let out a soft, condescending laugh before taking a coffee and walking away without leaving a tip. Sienna flushed bright red, gripping the plastic coffee pot so tightly her knuckles turned white. She was trapped in her own personal hell, stripped of her twins, stripped of her wealth, and stripped of every single ounce of her fabricated dignity. Cole placed his hand on the small of my back, gently bringing my attention back to the front of the room. The head auctioneer, a stern-looking federal contractor, stepped up to the wooden podium and tapped the microphone. The low murmur of the crowd died down. The liquidation was about to begin. Cole and I did not sneak into the back row to hide in the shadows with my parents. We walked straight down the center aisle of the exhibition hall. I wore a perfectly tailored emerald green suit that projected quiet, absolute power. Cole walked beside me, radiating that same terrifying calm that had broken my family apart at the anniversary dinner. We moved with the synchronized confidence of a couple who had survived the absolute worst and emerged completely victorious. As we walked down the aisle, heads began to turn. The Chicago financial elite recognized us. They knew the story. They knew I was the senior forensic accountant who had triggered the collapse of the very empire they were here to pick over. I felt the weight of Catherine's stare burning into the back of my head from her dark corner. I heard a sharp gasp from the catering table as Sienna realized I was in the room looking like a literal queen while she stood trapped behind a stack of paper napkins. I did not look at either of them. They were no longer relevant to my future. We took our seats in the very front row, reserved specifically for registered premium bidders. I crossed my legs and rested my hands on my lap, feeling a profound sense of peace settle over my chest. The chaos of the past 2 years, the agonizing fertility treatments, the crushing debt, and the endless emotional abuse were finally behind me. The auctioneer cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses, looking out over the crowded room. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now begin the bidding for lot number 1, the auctioneer announced, his voice echoing through the large speakers. This lot contains the core commercial holding deeds originally established by the grandfather of the estate, containing 4 prime real estate locations in the downtown district. Bidding will commence at $2.5 million. He did not even get the chance to ask for an opening bid. The heavy doors at the back of the hall swung open, but I did not turn around to look. Elise and Cole sat immaculate and exuding quiet power. I smoothly raised my bright yellow bidding paddle high into the air. $2.5 million, the auctioneer announced, pointing his wooden gavel directly at me. We have an opening bid of $2.5 million from paddle number 7. The exhibition hall went dead silent. The wealthy real estate developers and hedge fund managers sitting around us shifted in their folding chairs. A few of them whispered to each other, but not a single person raised their paddle to challenge me. They knew exactly who I was. They knew I was the forensic accountant who had mapped out this entire criminal enterprise, and they knew the federal government had just returned every single stolen dollar of my medical trust fund directly into my personal accounts. "Do I hear 2.6? The auctioneer called out, scanning the room. "Going once, going twice." The gavel came down with a sharp, echoing crack. "Sold to paddle number 7. I slowly lowered my bright yellow paddle and rested it on my lap. Cole reached over and gently squeezed my hand. A profound sense of closure washed over me. With that single strike of the wooden gavel, I had just legally reclaimed the absolute core of my late grandfather's original commercial real estate empire. I did not buy it with dirty charity funds. I bought it with the clean, protected money my grandfather had explicitly set aside for my future. The auction continued at a blistering pace. I did not bid on everything. I had absolutely no interest in the gaudy, superficial assets my parents had acquired during their decade of fraud. When Catherine's fleet of imported luxury SUVs rolled across the projection screen, I sat perfectly still. When Thomas's country club memberships and offshore investment portfolios were liquidated, I did not even blink. I let the bargain hunters and the asset vultures fight over the hollow symbols of my parents' boundless greed. I only raised my paddle for the genuine, untainted pieces of my grandfather's legacy. I bought back the historic downtown office buildings he had built from the ground up. I purchased the original family investment charters. I systematically curated and reclaimed the exact history my mother had tried to destroy. And I did it all using the very same money she had stolen from me to buy Sienna's silence. Every dollar I spent today was a dollar the Internal Revenue Service had forcefully extracted from Catherine's hidden offshore accounts. The poetic justice was absolute. After 2 grueling hours of relentless financial liquidation, the head auctioneer announced a brief 15-minute intermission before they began auctioning off the residential properties. The crowd immediately stood up, stretching their legs and moving toward the catering table where Sienna was still trapped, serving lukewarm coffee in her polyester uniform. I remained seated in the front row, carefully reviewing the certified ownership transfer documents a federal clerk had just handed me. Cole stood up, adjusting his tailored suit jacket, and positioned himself slightly in front of my chair, projecting a quiet but impenetrable barrier of protection. I heard the slow, dragging footsteps before I actually saw her. I looked up from my legal documents. Catherine was walking down the center aisle of the exhibition hall, making her way toward the front row. The wealthy socialites and business partners who used to kiss her cheek at charity galas actively stepped out of her way, treating her like a walking contagion. Nobody wanted to be seen associating with a convicted fraudster waiting for her federal sentencing date. My mother stopped just 3 feet away from where I was sitting. She looked entirely broken. The woman who had proudly humiliated me at her anniversary dinner was completely gone. Her shoulders were slumped, and the cheap beige coat she was wearing seemed to swallow her fragile frame. Without her expensive skincare routines and her private stylist, she looked hollowed out. Cole tensed, ready to intervene, but I held up my hand, signaling for him to let her speak. I was not afraid of her anymore. She had absolutely no power left. Catherine stared down at the certified deeds resting on my lap. She saw the official federal stamps confirming that I was now the sole legal owner of the empire she had spent her entire life trying to control. Her lower lip trembled and her eyes filled with bitter, resentful tears. "Are you happy now?" Catherine asked, her voice, a ragged, brittle whisper that barely carried over the noise of the crowded room. I kept my hands folded and looked up at her, maintaining complete eye contact. I did not offer her a single ounce of pity. "You destroyed your own family," Catherine continued, a pathetic sob catching in her throat. "You took the documents to the feds. You turned Sienna against me. You dragged our name through the mud, and now you are sitting here buying up the scraps of my life. You left us with nothing, Elise. You left us with absolutely nothing." She stood there crying, waiting for me to show some sign of remorse. She wanted me to apologize. She wanted me to crack under the weight of a daughter's guilt. She truly believed that because she had given birth to me, I owed her my loyalty, even after she had actively tried to destroy my future. But the scared, desperate woman who used to crave her mother's approval had died in the executive boardroom months ago. I looked at the woman standing in front of me with complete emotional detachment. There was no anger left in my heart. There was no sadness and no desire for revenge. There was only the cold, hard reality of a closed ledger. I slowly stood up from my chair, standing tall and composed in my emerald green suit. I looked down at my mother and delivered the final absolute truth. "The family was dead the day you stole my future to fund your vanity." "Mother," I said, my voice perfectly calm and lethal, "I just signed the death certificate." 3 weeks had passed since the public auction. The dust had finally settled over the ruins of my parents' fraudulent empire. Cole and I were spending a quiet Saturday afternoon in the backyard of our Lincoln Park townhouse. The shattered glass door from my parents' violent break-in had been replaced with reinforced steel and solid oak long ago. Now the house felt like a fortress of absolute peace. The late summer air was warm and the rich smell of smoked brisket filled the patio. We had invited Andre over for a weekend barbecue with the twins. Andre stood by the grill, expertly turning the meat. The former federal prosecutor had traded his tailored charcoal courtroom suits for a casual t-shirt and jeans, but he still commanded the space with a quiet, protective authority. As a Black American man raising biracial twins entirely on his own, he took his role as a father incredibly seriously. He was actively dismantling every single toxic, materialistic trait Sienna had tried to instill in those children. I watched as the twins ran across the lush green grass, chasing a bright yellow soccer ball. Under Sienna's care, those children were treated like expensive accessories. They were dressed in uncomfortable designer clothes and yelled at if they got a single speck of dirt on their shoes. But today they were just kids. They wore simple cotton shirts and their knees were stained with grass. When one of them accidentally knocked over a heavy potted plant, Andre did not scream or belittle him the way my parents would have done. He walked over, knelt down to eye level, and calmly helped his son clean up the spilled dirt, teaching accountability through patience and respect instead of fear and manipulation. It was a beautiful sight to witness. We were building a healthy, chosen family dynamic entirely separated from the narcissistic poison of my blood relatives. Cole was sitting on the patio steps, laughing deeply as he showed the other twin how to fly a small remote-controlled drone. The elite cybersecurity expert, who had ruthlessly dismantled my parents' digital banking network, was now using his technical skills to entertain a 5-year-old. The heavy burden of my past felt a million miles away. I walked back inside the house to grab a tray of cold drinks from the kitchen. As I passed the entryway table, I noticed the Daily Mail sitting in a neat stack on the granite counter. I flipped through the mundane utility bills and local catalogs until a plain white envelope caught my attention. The return address was printed in cheap, faded ink. It was stamped from a federal minimum security correctional institution located downstate. The sender name written in sloppy cursive was Thomas. I set the drinks down and ripped the envelope open. I did not feel a spike of anxiety or dread. The paralyzing fear he used to instill in me was completely eradicated. I unfolded the lined yellow paper and read his handwriting, with the clinical detachment of a senior forensic accountant auditing a bankrupt ledger. I evaluated his words the same way I evaluated a fraudulent tax return. He had spent my entire life viewing me as a defective investment, a flawed asset that failed to yield the grandchildren he demanded. Now that his golden child was ruined and his wife was locked away in a separate facility, he was trying to extract resources from the scapegoat. The sheer audacity was staggering. It was exactly what I expected. It was not a letter of apology. It was not a profound reflection on his massive tax evasion or a plea for my forgiveness after he tried to ruin my career and steal my inheritance. It was a list of arrogant demands. He complained bitterly about the quality of the prison cafeteria food, stating it was unfit for a man of his stature. He complained that the thin mattress hurt his back and that his fellow inmates did not respect his former corporate authority. Then came the true purpose of the correspondence. He begged me to deposit $500 into his prison commissary account. He wrote that since I had successfully reclaimed the family real estate empire, I owed him a comfortable lifestyle behind bars. He actually believed that biological obligation meant I was required to fund his premium snacks and upgraded toiletries while he served his federal sentence for fraud. I walked back out to the patio holding the yellow piece of paper in my hand. Cole looked up from the drone remote, immediately noticing the document. He handed the controller to the twin and walked over to me, taking the letter from my fingers. He read it silently, his dark eyes scanning the pathetic, entitled demands of a ruined man. Cole did not get angry. He did not raise his voice or offer a sharp remark. He simply turned around and walked toward the large stone fire pit crackling in the center of our patio. He held the letter out over the open flames and casually dropped it. I stood beside my husband, and we watched the lined yellow paper curl, turn black and disintegrate into floating ash. The last remaining tether to my toxic father dissolved into nothingness, rising into the summer sky and vanishing completely. Just as the final scrap of paper turned to ash, my cell phone began to ring inside my jacket pocket. I pulled it out and checked the caller ID. It was a number I had saved to my favorites list many months ago. I answered the call, putting it on speaker so Cole could hear. A warm, professional voice greeted me over the line. "Elise, this is the director from the private adoption agency," the woman said, her voice bright with genuine excitement. "We just received the final evaluations from the board. Your background checks and your financial stability reports are absolutely flawless." She took a joyful breath. "I am calling to tell you that we have a match." The phone call from the adoption director shifted the entire axis of my universe. I stood on the patio with the phone pressed to my ear, listening as she explained the details of the birth mother and the beautiful baby waiting for us. When I finally ended the call, my hands were trembling. Cole pulled me into his chest, burying his face in my hair. I closed my eyes and let the reality wash over me. For years, I had allowed my mother to convince me that my worth was tied to my ability to produce a biological heir. She had weaponized my painful medical struggles, using my trauma to elevate Sienna and solidify her own twisted narrative of perfection. But in that single moment on the patio, the shame of 3 failed clinical cycles completely vanished. My body was not defective. It simply belonged to a different path. 7 months later, I stood in the doorway of the nursery, located on the second floor of our townhouse. The afternoon sunlight poured through the large bay windows, bathing the room in a rich, golden warmth. Cole and I had spent weeks preparing this space carefully, selecting every single detail. The walls were painted a soft, calming ivory, replacing the cold, sterile atmosphere that used to haunt this empty room. Hanging proudly in the center of the longest wall, right above a plush rocking chair, was the massive oil painting of the Maine coastline. The vibrant brushstrokes created by my late grandfather commanded the space. Every time I looked at that canvas, I remembered the sheer panic in Catherine's eyes when I legally stripped it from her trembling hands during the federal raid. She had tried to steal my grandfather's legacy to fund a fraudulent suburban fantasy. Now his artwork hung exactly where it belonged, watching over a future built on absolute truth and integrity. The heavy oak front door of our townhouse opened downstairs, breaking me out of my reverie. I heard the deep rumble of Cole's voice, followed by the excited but hushed whispers of young boys. I turned and walked down the hallway to meet them. Cole was standing in the foyer holding a pristine white car seat with the utmost care. Inside, wrapped in a soft knit blanket, was our beautiful newborn daughter. We had finalized the adoption papers just 48 hours ago, and the ink on the legal documents binding her to us forever was finally dry. Andre stepped into the foyer right behind Cole. The former federal prosecutor closed the front door quietly. He had brought the twins over to welcome us home. Under Andre's sole custody, the boys had completely transformed. They were no longer the spoiled, entitled accessories Sienna used to parade around the country club. They were polite, empathetic, and genuinely happy children. Andre gently placed a hand on each of their shoulders, guiding them forward. "You can go look," the prosecutor said, his deep voice filled with incredible warmth. "But remember what we practiced in the car. We use our quiet voices today." The twins nodded solemnly and tiptoed over to the car seat. They peered inside, looking at the sleeping infant with wide, fascinated eyes. One of the boys looked up at me and offered a bright, genuine smile. "She is really small, Aunt Elise," he whispered carefully, keeping his voice down. "She will grow fast," I promised, reaching out to ruffle his hair. Cole lifted the baby from the carrier, cradling her against his chest with a natural, protective grace. We walked upstairs together as a unified group, moving toward the sunlit nursery. I sat down in the plush rocking chair beneath my grandfather's painting. Cole gently transferred our sleeping daughter into my arms. I looked down at her perfect, peaceful face. She breathed softly, completely unaware of the massive corporate empires that had burned to the ground to secure her safe arrival into this world. She would never know the cold, calculating manipulation of a narcissistic grandmother. She would never have her self-worth tied to a fraudulent charity ledger or a stolen trust fund. She would be raised with the one thing Catherine and Thomas were completely incapable of providing: unconditional love. Andre leaned against the doorframe of the nursery, watching us with a quiet, respectful smile. He had spent his entire career putting violent criminals and corrupt executives behind bars, but he knew that the greatest victory was not just destroying the wicked, it was protecting the innocent. He had saved his sons from Sienna's toxic influence, and now he was standing guard as my chosen family. Cole stepped up behind my rocking chair. He wrapped his strong arms around my shoulders, leaning down to press a soft kiss against my temple. I leaned my head back against him, feeling the solid, unshakable weight of his support. He had hacked servers, intercepted offshore wire transfers, and faced down violent extortionists without ever blinking. He had dismantled my abusers with ruthless digital precision. Now he was just a father looking at his daughter. My mother had spent my entire life calling me a burden. She tried to convince everyone that I was a barren, miserable failure who was jealous of my sister's fabricated life. But as I sat in the sunlight holding my beautiful child surrounded by a husband who would burn the world down for me and an ally who represented the absolute pinnacle of justice, I realized the ultimate truth. The sweetest payoff was not watching my parents' estate get auctioned off to strangers. It was not hearing the judge hand down their federal prison sentences or watching Sienna lose her stolen mansion. Those were just the necessary steps to clean up the infection. The true revenge was the absolute profound peace radiating through this nursery. I had exterminated the parasites. I had reclaimed my stolen legacy. I had rewritten the entire ending of my story, and I did it all without compromising a single ounce of my integrity. I looked at the painting on the wall, then down at the beautiful baby resting against my chest. The cycle of narcissistic abuse was permanently broken, and my real life had finally begun. The greatest lesson I learned is that blood does not make someone family. I endured my own mother's cruelty and my sister's entitlement because I believed biological ties meant I had to stay. But true family is built on unconditional love, respect, and unwavering support, not manipulation. Walking away from toxic relatives is never a sign of failure, but a necessary act of self-preservation. I had to let go of my past to build the chosen family I truly deserved. Have you ever cut ties with toxic relatives to protect your peace? Share your story in the comments below.